Okay, so the patients with 22q11 deletion syndrome, they have a high variability of clinical presence. So, for example, they have a lot of medical issues. They can have late effects, congenital heart diseases, but also immune deficiency. And next to that, they have also neurodevelopmental delay with intellectual disability and speech impairment. So what I wanted to say, all kids and all young adults with 22q11 deletion syndrome are very different, but they all have a lot of challenges ahead. And it can be very different for all of these patients, what it is that is difficult for them. When we look into the psychiatric problems that they have, you can see that they have a lot of risk factors. There is the immune deficiency. They also have early cognitive decline, which can be a risk factor for example, psychotic symptoms. The environment can also be a factor in developing psychiatric problems. For example, when kids have difficulties with social development, they can be often a victim of bullying. Then, as the previous presenter also explained, that DNA and DNA methylation can be a factor of developing, for example, psychotic symptoms. So in literature, scientists are often prone to look into risk factors of developing these symptoms. And what we would like to do is to see if resilience can be a protective factor for these young adults. So now, normally my slide should have been shifted to resilience. I don't know if you can...
We still see risk factors at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, now we see. So I think you have to, I don't know why it's delayed.
Yeah, I will just stay here and see what can happen. So resilience was also explained this morning by Professor Romanos, and he explained that it was the capability to maintain or regain mental health during or after encountering challenging situations. So it can be physical problems or health problems, but also in these COVID times, when people have a lower resilience, they're more prone to developing, for example, psychiatric problems. In here, this is the adolescent resilience model, and it is the interplay between resilience, quality of life, environment, and personal factors. So this is a model that we would like to test in our study, and we were most interested in the correlation between resilience and quality of life in these patients. So what did we do for the methodology of the study? We collected participants at the Center for Human Genetics in Leuven. All patients of young adult age, so between 16 and 30, they were offered to participate. So they all got a letter at home, or they were invited when they came in the hospital for a consultation. And 33 participants with 22q11 participated. And we wanted to compare it with a comparable group. So the other group that was included in the study were patients with intellectual disability who stayed in residential care. So here we invited 26 participants to participate in the study. We gave them questionnaires to fill in. So first we gathered information on the environmental factors and personal characteristics. So for example, history of health problems, surgery in the past, prior education or special needs in the educational systems. Also resilience, of course. And resilience is measured with a resilience scale, and it consists of 2 subscales, which is personal competence and acceptance of self and life. Quality of life was also measured with a Likert scale, and it is with 5 subscales, so overall quality of life, physical health, psychological health, social relations, and environment. And then the last set of lists was behavioral problems, which is both assessed with a self-rate questionnaire and with a questionnaire by their caregivers. And it looks into internalizing and externalizing problems. So this is an overview. I don't know if you can see it very well, but it is to compare the two groups. So we have the 22q11 group and the ID group, which is intellectual disability group. And you see that they differ for two subscales, which is that the group with 22q11 had more health problems, and the group of the intellectual disability group was a little bit older. But for the other subscales, there was no difference between the groups. Okay, so for the results, these are the results of the total resilience in all groups. So we have the 22q11 group, the ID group, and then we compared it to three other groups for the norm scores. So you see that there is a very high difference, significant difference between 22q11 group and the ID group, but they take in an intermediate position between the ID group and the patients in ambulance psychiatric care, which could be an explanation that the psychiatric problems can be very high in 22q11, and they seem to have a resilience between these two groups. Then for the quality of life, there seemed to be no difference between the two groups, but it was interesting to see that the parents scored more problems for internalizing problems and total problems than the young adults. And we also were thinking, how could it be? What can have happened? But patients with 22q11 are often very pleasing, and they don't want to bother anyone. So it can be that they made an underestimation of their own problems, but it can be also more difficult for them to really see what all the problems are that they have. For example, due to the cognitive deficits or because of the higher prevalence of autism in this group. In the paper that we published on these data, we built two models, a resilience model and a quality of life model. So we included, we modeled the level of resilience as a function of the group, so 22q11 or the intellectual disability group, age, gender, cognitive functioning, and the behavior problems. What we saw is that patients with a higher score on the behavior problems had a lower resilience, and it was present in both groups. For the quality of life model, the same factors were used in the model, and we saw that acceptance of self and life, which was a subscale of resilience, was predictive for quality of life, but not a total resilience score in C. The total score of the YASER, which is the behavioral problems and health problems, these were the factors that were most predictive for quality of life. The entire overview of what subscale contributes for what part to the model, it can be found in the article, but it wasn't very readable on a slide. So what are my take-home messages? It's very important to know that these young adults with 22q11, they have a lower resilience. And it's important to see it as an inherent vulnerability, which is, even if you correct for other factors, still lower. Independent from several personal and environmental characteristics, they have a limited resilience. Also important, the quality of life is highly correlated with physical problems. So these patients, they often have early on in age a lot of physical problems, and it is important to try to do an early intervention so that the problems are as limited as they can be. And it's also very important to pay attention to both physical and mental health, because we also see that the resilience in patients with 22q11 deletion syndrome, it takes an intermediate position between the patients with ID and the patients in psychiatric care. So this is what I wanted to tell you. And if you have more questions about the exact models, you can always take a look at the paper or ask questions if you want to. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much for the nice presentation. I was wondering if, because I think you mentioned it, maybe I missed it, you mentioned that you controlled for gender effect, but I was wondering if you looked at the effect of gender as a really variable of interest.
Yeah, so we looked into gender as well, and gender had an effect on the social problems as well. So in females, there was a lower risk for social problems, and it also had an effect on resilience. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting. Thank you so much.